The golden light erupted across the Chicago skyline like a second sun being born. Buildings trembled, windows shattered in perfect synchronization. And in that moment of impossible radiance, reality itself seemed to crack at the seams. But this wasn't Earth anymore. This wasn't the familiar world where Robert Reynolds had spent decades wrestling with the terrifying power that dwelled within him. No, this was something far darker, far more brutal, and infinitely more dangerous. The Sentry opened his eyes to crimson skies that wept ash and the stench of perpetual war. Above him, Gothic spires pierced the polluted atmosphere like the ribs of some colossal beast. The architecture was wrong, alien yet somehow familiar, as if humanity had taken everything beautiful about its construction and twisted it into monuments of grim functionality. Massive cathedrals stretched toward the bleeding heavens, their surfaces crawling with gargoyles and aquillas, symbols he didn't recognize but that filled him with an inexplicable sense of both hope and dread. Where was he? How had he gotten here? The last thing Robert remembered was the final confrontation with the void, that terrible dark reflection of everything he represented. They had been locked in combat above Manhattan, two forces of unimaginable power tearing reality apart with each blow exchanged. Then there had been that flash, that moment when the barriers between dimensions had grown thin, and something had reached out from the darkness between worlds to drag him through. The Sentry rose to his feet, his cape billowing in winds that carried the scent of incense and gunpowder. The ground beneath him was ferrocrete, scarred by decades of warfare and marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. In the distance, he could hear the sound of marching feet, thousands upon thousands of them moving in perfect synchronization. But there was something else too, a psychic pressure that pressed against his consciousness like the weight of an ocean. It was familiar yet alien, vast beyond comprehension, and tinged with a sadness that seemed to encompass the suffering of an entire species. A voice crackled from speakers hidden throughout the urban landscape, speaking in a language he somehow understood despite never having heard it before. The words spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of an emperor who watched over humanity from his golden throne. They spoke of threats that lurked in the spaces between stars and of the eternal vigilance required to keep the darkness at bay. As the words washed over him, Robert felt something stir within his chest, a resonance that went deeper than mere understanding. This wasn't his Earth, but it was still a world where humanity struggled to survive, and where there was humanity in peril, the Sentry had always found purpose. But this reality was different from anything he had encountered before. The psychic atmosphere was thick with emotions he could barely comprehend. Fear, yes, but not the simple terror of a mugging or a natural disaster. This was existential dread, the kind that came from knowing that forces beyond human comprehension actively sought the extinction of everything you held dear. There was faith, too, burning bright and desperate, directed toward an entity whose presence Robert could feel even now, a golden light that seemed to emanate from somewhere impossibly distant yet achingly close. Movement caught his attention. From the shadows of a nearby hab block emerged figures clad in black armor, their faces hidden behind skull-shaped masks. They moved with predatory grace, weapons trained on his position before he had even registered their presence. These weren't ordinary soldiers. There was something about them that set Robert's enhanced senses on edge, a cold efficiency that spoke of genetic modification and psychological conditioning beyond anything his own world had ever achieved. The leader of the group raised a hand, and the others held their positions. When he spoke, his voice was filtered through a vox grill that stripped away all humanity from the sound. Anomalous entity detected, power readings beyond baseline human parameters, threat assessment in progress. Robert raised his hands slowly, a gesture of peace he hoped would translate across whatever cultural barriers existed here. "I'm not a threat," he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. "My name is Robert Reynolds. I'm not from this world, and I don't know how I got here." The soldiers exchanged glances that he couldn't see behind their masks, but their body language spoke of confusion and concern. One of them activated a device on his wrist, speaking in rapid, clipped tones to someone on the other end of the communication. Robert caught fragments of the conversation. references to Xenos infiltration and warp manifestation, and something called inquisitorial protocol. While they spoke, Robert took the opportunity to extend his senses outward, trying to get a better understanding of his surroundings. What he found made him stagger. The psychic landscape of this world was unlike anything he had ever experienced. There were billions of human minds, but they were all connected in some way, all drawing strength from that distant golden presence he had felt earlier. But there was something else too, something that lurked in the spaces between thoughts, pressing against the barriers of reality with malevolent hunger. The darkness here wasn't just the absence of light. It was an active force, a presence that sought to corrupt and destroy everything it touched. And it was vast beyond imagination, stretching across dimensions and realities like a cancer that fed on despair and hatred. Robert had faced cosmic-level threats before, entities that could reshape reality with a thought, but this was different. This was evil given form and purpose, and it was actively at war with everything that lived and breathed and hoped. "My readings are off the charts," one of the soldiers was saying into his communicator. "Whatever this thing is, it's not showing up on any of our xenoforms databases. Psychic signature is massive but stable. No signs of warp taint that I can detect." "Warp taint?" Robert asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. The reaction was immediate. Every weapon in the squad swung toward him, and he could hear the distinctive whine of energy weapons charging to full power. The leader stepped forward, his posture radiating barely controlled aggression. "How do you know that term anomaly? No uncorrupted human should have knowledge of the warp without proper sanctioning. Explain yourself immediately, or we will be forced to consider you a hostile entity." Robert could feel the tension ratcheting up with each passing second. These soldiers were professionals, trained to deal with threats he couldn't even imagine, and right now they saw him as exactly that kind of threat. But there was something else he could sense beneath their aggression: fear. Not fear of him specifically, but fear of what he might represent. In this reality, knowledge itself seemed to be dangerous, and the wrong kind of understanding could apparently mark you as an enemy of humanity itself. "I don't know what the warp is," Robert said carefully, trying to project calm and honesty. "I only repeated what I heard you say. Where I come from, we have different names for the spaces between realities. I've traveled through dimensions before, usually not." The leader, by choice, tilted his head, processing this information. Dimensional travel without sanctioned Geller field protection should result in immediate corruption or death. Yet you stand here apparently unaffected. This is highly irregular. Before Robert could respond, a new sound filled the air. It started as a low rumble, like thunder rolling across distant mountains, but it quickly grew into something far more ominous. The very air began to vibrate, and Robert could see the soldiers around him growing more agitated. Whatever was approaching, they were clearly unprepared for it. "Contact! Contact!" one of the soldiers shouted into his communicator. Unknown aerial signatures approaching from the northwest. Multiple targets, moving at impossible speeds. Robert looked up and felt his blood run cold. Descending from the crimson sky were shapes that defied easy description. They were organic but wrong, like living spacecraft that had been grown rather than built. Their surfaces pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and as they drew closer, he could see things moving within translucent sections of their hulls. These weren't machines piloted by thinking beings. These were thinking beings that had become machines, or perhaps the other way around. "Tyranids," the squad leader hissed, and Robert could hear genuine fear in his electronically filtered voice. How did they get past the orbital defenses? "All units, fall back to secondary positions. Priority Alpha transmission to Inquisitorial Command. We have a xenoform incursion in Sector 779. The creatures were descending rapidly now, and Robert could see smaller forms dropping from their bellies like spores being released from some cosmic fungus. Each one was different, but they all shared certain characteristics. Chitinous armor, multiple limbs ending in weapons that were clearly organic in origin, and a sense of purpose that was both alien and terrifyingly focused. This was an invasion force, Robert realized. These things had come here not to conquer but to consume. He could sense their hunger even from this distance, a bottomless need to devour and assimilate everything in their path. They saw the humans around him not as enemies to be defeated, but as biomass to be processed, raw material to fuel their endless expansion across the galaxy. The soldiers were already moving, their fear overridden by training and duty. But Robert could see the tactical situation developing, and it wasn't good. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that seemed purpose-built for this kind of warfare. Without support, these brave men and women would be overwhelmed within minutes. That familiar feeling began to build in Robert's chest, the same sensation that had driven him to don the cape and fly toward danger countless times before. These weren't his people, and this wasn't his world, but they were human beings facing extinction at the hands of something that wanted to erase everything they were and had ever been. The Sentry had always been about protection, about standing as a guardian between humanity and the darkness that sought to destroy it. The setting had changed, but the fundamental equation remained the same. There were innocents in danger, and he had the power to help them. Golden light began to emanate from his body as he made his decision. The soldiers around him stepped back, their weapons now trained on him once again, but Robert barely noticed. His attention was focused upward, on the descending swarm of alien horrors that threatened everything this strange new world represented. "I need you all to fall back," Robert said, his voice carrying a resonance that made the ferrocrete beneath their feet vibrate. The golden aura surrounding him intensified, casting dancing shadows across the Gothic architecture. "Get your people to safety. I'll handle this." The squad leader's weapon wavered, confusion evident in his posture. "Anomaly, you don't understand what you're facing. These are Tyranids. They've consumed entire star systems. Their hive mind adapts to every tactic, learns from every engagement. A single entity, no matter how powerful, cannot stand against a swarm." Robert turned to face the soldier, and for a moment the man stumbled backward. The golden light emanating from the Sentry's eyes wasn't harsh or blinding. Instead, it carried warmth, hope, the promise that darkness could be held at bay. "I've faced swarms before. I've stood against cosmic entities that devour realities for breakfast. Trust me when I say that sometimes one person in the right place can make all the difference." The first wave of Tyranid organisms struck the ground with impacts that shook the hab blocks. They were smaller than the bioships that had delivered them, but each one was a masterpiece of evolutionary warfare. Hormagaunts scuttled forward on blade-tipped limbs, their movements coordinated by invisible signals from the hive mind. Behind them came larger forms, termagants with living weapons that pulsed with bioluminescent targeting systems. And towering over them all, a carnifex, a living battering ram whose armored carapace showed scars from previous battles across the galaxy. The Sentry rose into the air with the grace of a man stepping off a curb, no thrust, no visible means of propulsion. He simply defied gravity through an act of will that made the local laws of physics politely step aside. The Tyranids immediately recognized him as a threat. Dozens of bioweapons swiveled in his direction, spitting streams of corrosive fluid and razor-sharp projectiles that would have shredded any normal human. They struck his golden aura and simply ceased to exist, not deflected, not absorbed, but negated at a fundamental level. The Sentry descended among the swarm like a star given human form, and where he passed, the alien creatures fell silent. His first punch connected with the carnifex, and the sound that followed wasn't the crack of breaking chitin or the wet splatter of alien biology. It was the deep, resonant tone of a cathedral bell, as if reality itself was announcing that something significant had just occurred. The massive bioconstruct didn't explode or disintegrate. Instead, it simply stopped. Every function ceased simultaneously, as if someone had pulled the plug on a machine. The creature toppled backward, its bulk crushing a dozen smaller organisms that had been advancing in its wake. The watching soldiers stared in stunned silence. They had witnessed space marines in combat, seen the legendary warriors of the Adeptus Astartes carve through enemy formations with chainblade and bolter. They had heard tales of the Primarchs, those demigod generals who had once walked among humanity during the Great Crusade, but this was something different entirely. The Sentry moved through the Tyranid swarm with the fluid grace of a dancer, but every gesture carried lethal intent. A casual backhand sent a warrior bioform tumbling through the air to crash into a distant hab block. A gentle push of his palm created a pressure wave that flattened 24 hormagaunts like insects beneath a boot. He wasn't fighting with rage or desperation. He was simply removing obstacles with the same efficiency someone might use to clear weeds from a garden. But the Tyranids were learning. The hive mind was processing every action, every display of power, calculating counters and adaptations. New bioforms began to emerge from the larger organisms, creatures specifically designed to combat this golden-wreathed threat. They moved differently, their attacks coordinated in ways that suggested a deeper understanding of their opponent's capabilities. A lictor materialized behind the Sentry, its chameleonic skin having rendered it virtually invisible until the moment it struck. Scythe-like talons designed to punch through ceramite armor swept toward Robert's neck with killing force. They connected with his skin and stopped as if they had struck neutronium. The creature's momentum carried it forward, and Robert caught it almost gently, his hands closing around the alien assassin's torso. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and there was genuine sadness in his voice. "I know you're just following your nature, but I can't let you hurt these people." The lictor dissolved in his grip, not destroyed but somehow encouraged to cease existing in this particular arrangement of matter and energy. The effect spread outward like ripples in a pond, touching every Tyranid organism in a widening circle. One by one, they began to fall silent, their connection to the hive mind severing as the Sentry's power washed over them. High above, in the bioship still descending from orbit, synapse creatures writhed in confusion. The data stream from the surface forces had become garbled, filled with readings that made no sense according to any biological parameters they understood. How could a single organism generate energy signatures that rivaled the output of a star? How could it exist without any detectable biological systems to support such power? The hive mind reached a conclusion that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. This entity represented a threat not just to this particular feeding operation, but to the Tyranid species as a whole. If it could not be consumed and adapted, it had to be eliminated at any cost. New organisms began to emerge from the bioships, creatures that had never been deployed in normal warfare. These were the Tyranids' answer to threats that existed beyond conventional biological parameters. They pulsed with warp energy, their forms twisted by exposure to forces that existed outside normal space-time. The hive mind had learned to weaponize chaos itself, turning the galaxy's greatest spiritual threat into just another tool of consumption. Robert felt the change in the air immediately. The psychic pressure that he had noticed upon arriving in this reality suddenly spiked, becoming a crushing weight that pressed down on his consciousness. But more than that, he could feel something else stirring in response. That distant golden presence, the entity these humans called their emperor, was taking notice of events unfolding on the surface of this world. The sensation was unlike anything Robert had experienced before. It wasn't communication in any conventional sense, but rather a moment of recognition between two beings who existed on levels far beyond normal human comprehension. For just an instant, the Sentry found himself standing not on a war-torn street, but in a vast golden hall, facing a figure seated upon a throne that seemed to stretch into infinity. The being before him was dying, that much was immediately clear. Its physical form was a withered husk, sustained by technology beyond Robert's understanding. But its psychic presence filled the hall like the light of 10,000 suns, a radiance that spoke of sacrifice and duty carried across millennia. When it spoke, the words bypassed Robert's ears entirely, imprinting themselves directly onto his consciousness. Another guardian arrives in humanity's darkest hour, but you are not of this reality, Golden One. Your light burns differently, carries hope where mine has learned only grim necessity. Robert found his voice, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking aloud or simply thinking with unusual clarity. "I didn't choose to come here, but I won't stand by while people suffer. That's not who I am." The Emperor's presence seemed to shift, and for a moment Robert caught a glimpse of what this being had once been. A man, brilliant and driven, who had taken upon himself the burden of guiding humanity through an age of darkness. But the weight of that responsibility had changed him, transformed him into something that was both more and less than human. Choice is a luxury few can afford in this age, but perhaps that is what makes your light shine so brightly. You still believe in the possibility of perfect victories, battles won without compromise or sacrifice. There was something that might have been wistfulness in that psychic voice. Guard that belief well, Sentry of the distant stars. This reality will test it in ways your own never could. The vision faded, and Robert found himself back on the battlefield, surrounded by the aftermath of his intervention. The Tyranid ground forces had been neutralized, their bioforms lying silent and still across the scarred ferrocrete. But overhead, the bioships were still descending, and he could sense new horrors preparing to deploy. The real battle was just beginning. The soldiers who had initially confronted him were approaching cautiously, their weapons lowered but ready. The squad leader removed his helmet, revealing a face marked by scars and augmetic implants that spoke of a lifetime spent in humanity's service. His eyes held a mixture of awe and wariness as he studied the golden-wreathed figure before him. "I am Sergeant Valdris of the 47th Cadian Shock Troops," he said formally. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, I thank you for your intervention against the Xenos threat. But I must ask, what manner of being are you? The power you display rivals that of the legendary Primarchs themselves." Robert lowered himself to the ground, his feet touching ferrocrete with barely a whisper of sound. The golden aura around him dimmed, but didn't disappear entirely, as if his very presence was naturally luminous in this reality. "I'm just someone who believes that people deserve to be protected from things like this. Where I come from, we call individuals with abilities like mine heroes, though I'm beginning to suspect that word might mean something different in your universe." Valdris exchanged glances with his men, their faces reflecting the same mixture of confusion and cautious hope. In the Imperium of man, heroes were a dangerous concept. History was littered with the bones of those who had believed themselves saviors of humanity, only to fall to corruption or reveal themselves as agents of the ruinous powers. Yet there was something about this being's presence that defied their grim expectations. "Heroes," Valdris repeated the word, as if tasting something foreign. "In our reality, such individuals are viewed with suspicion. Too much power concentrated in one person inevitably leads to catastrophe. The greatest heroes of our past became our most terrible enemies." He gestured toward the silent Tyranid corpses. "Yet I cannot deny what you have accomplished here. An entire swarm neutralized without a single Imperial casualty." Robert nodded, understanding the soldier's caution. He had encountered similar reactions on his own Earth, though never quite so deeply ingrained. "I understand your concerns. Power can corrupt, and I've seen what happens when good intentions are twisted by forces beyond our comprehension. But that doesn't mean we should abandon hope entirely." A new voice crackled through Valdris's Vox unit, harsh and demanding. "Sergeant, report your status immediately. Orbital augers are detecting massive energy discharges from your position." "Are you under assault?" Valdris hesitated for a moment before activating his communicator. "This is Sergeant Valdris. The Xenos ground forces have been neutralized. We have encountered an unknown entity of immense power, but it appears to be acting in humanity's defense." Static filled the channel for several seconds before the voice returned, now carrying an edge of barely controlled alarm. "Unknown entity? Sergeant, you will maintain your position and ensure that nothing leaves the area. Inquisitorial forces are en route to investigate this anomaly. Any attempt to flee will be met with lethal force." The connection terminated, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its wake. Robert could see the conflict playing out across the soldiers' faces. Their training told them to treat him as a potential threat, but they had witnessed his actions firsthand. He had saved their lives and asked for nothing in return. "They're coming to study me," Robert observed, his enhanced senses picking up the approaching aircraft even before they appeared on the horizon. "Your Inquisition. I can feel their presence, their suspicion. They see me as something to be contained rather than someone who might help." Valdris looked genuinely troubled. "The Inquisition exists to protect humanity from threats we cannot comprehend. They have seen too many miracles turn into nightmares, too many saviors reveal themselves as demons in disguise. It is not personal, merely necessary. Above them, the bioships had reached the upper atmosphere, their organic hulls beginning to glow as they prepared for final descent. But something had changed in their behavior patterns. Instead of the coordinated assault Robert had expected, they seemed to be hesitating, their movements becoming erratic and unpredictable. The hive mind was reassessing its strategy, trying to formulate a response to this unprecedented threat. Robert closed his eyes and extended his senses upward, probing the alien consciousness that directed the swarm. What he found surprised him. The hive mind wasn't truly evil in the way he had initially assumed. It was alien, certainly, driven by imperatives that no human could fully understand, but it wasn't motivated by malice or hatred. It was simply hungry, following biological programming that had been refined across millions of years of evolution. In some ways, it reminded him of a force of nature. A hurricane didn't hate the cities it destroyed, and a wildfire bore no malice toward the forests it consumed. They simply existed, following patterns that had been established long before human civilization had risen to challenge them. The Tyranids were similar, but infinitely more complex and purposeful in their destruction. "They're not stopping," Valdris observed, his augmetic eye tracking the bioship's descent vectors. "Whatever you did to their ground forces, it hasn't deterred the main fleet. If anything, they seem more determined than before." Robert opened his eyes, the golden light within them intensifying. "They see me as a puzzle to be solved, something outside their normal experience that might represent either a threat or an opportunity. The hive mind is curious, in its own way." The first of the inquisitorial aircraft appeared on the horizon, sleek and predatory in design. But Robert's attention was drawn to something else, a presence aboard one of those craft that made his enhanced senses recoil instinctively. It was human, but wrong somehow, as if something fundamental about its nature had been deliberately altered. The psychic signature was cold, calculating, and tinged with the kind of absolute certainty that Robert had learned to associate with fanaticism. "That's them," Valdris said unnecessarily. "Inquisitor Vex and her retinue. She specializes in xenobiology and anomalous phenomena. If anyone can determine your true nature, it would be her." The aircraft set down with military precision, their landing thrusters scarring the ferrocrete with controlled bursts of superheated gas. The doors opened simultaneously, disgorging figures in elaborate armor that seemed to blend technology with religious symbolism. At their head walked a woman whose very presence seemed to darken the air around her. Her face was pale and angular, marked by scars that spoke of close encounters with forces beyond normal human comprehension. Inquisitor Vex approached with measured steps, her retinue fanning out in a defensive formation that could become an attack pattern at a moment's notice. Her eyes, Robert noticed, had been replaced with augmetic implants that glowed with a cold blue light. When she spoke, her voice carried the absolute authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I am Inquisitor Lydia Vex of the Ordo Xenos. You will identify yourself immediately and submit to examination. Any resistance will be interpreted as confirmation of hostile intent." Robert raised his hands in a peaceful gesture, though he remained alert for any sign of aggression. "My name is Robert Reynolds. I'm not from this reality, and I mean no harm to you or your people. I've already demonstrated that by helping your soldiers against the Tyranid incursion." Vex's augmetic eyes whirred as they focused on him, no doubt scanning across multiple spectrums simultaneously. Dimensional travel without proper Geller field protection should result in immediate demonic possession or death. Yet you claim to have crossed the barriers between realities unscathed. This suggests either deception or capabilities far beyond normal human parameters. "I'm not entirely human," Robert admitted. "I was exposed to energies from beyond normal space-time, and they changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. But the core of who I am remains unchanged. I use my abilities to protect people, nothing more." The Inquisitor circled him slowly, her retinue maintaining their positions. Robert could feel the weight of their scrutiny, devices that probed not just his physical form, but his psychic presence as well. Surprisingly, he sensed no immediate hostility from most of them. They were professionals doing their job, albeit one that required them to treat potential threats with extreme caution. The energy readings are unlike anything in our databases, one of Vex's subordinates reported. No trace of warp contamination, but the power levels are extraordinary. Whatever he is, he's not drawing energy from the Imperium. Vex nodded thoughtfully. Curious. In our experience, power of this magnitude almost invariably stems from contact with the warp or xenotech augmentation. Yet you display neither corruption nor obvious technological enhancement. She paused directly in front of him. Tell me, Robert Reynolds, what do you know of the forces that threaten humanity in this galaxy? Robert considered his words carefully. I'm learning. I can sense the darkness you're fighting against, the entities that exist in the spaces between realities. They're not unique to your universe, though they seem more active here than anywhere else I've encountered. And you claim to have experience fighting such entities. Different versions, but yes. Where I come from, we call them by other names, but the fundamental nature remains the same. They feed on negative emotions, seek to corrupt and destroy everything that lives and hopes and dreams. Vex's expression didn't change, but Robert caught a flicker of something that might have been surprise in her augmetic eyes. Few people spoke of the ruinous powers with such casual understanding, especially those claiming to be from outside this reality entirely. Their conversation was interrupted by a sound that made everyone present look skyward. The bioships had completed their descent and were now hovering just above the hab blocks, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. But instead of disgorging more ground forces, they seemed to be waiting for something. They're analyzing if mind is, Robert said quietly, the H trying to understand what I am before committing more resources. It's learned that conventional tactics won't work against me. As if responding to his words, one of the bioships began to change. Its hull rippled and flowed like living tissue, extruding new structures that defied easy categorization. They weren't weapons in any conventional sense, but Robert could feel the dangerous energies building within them. The Tyranids were preparing to deploy something they had never used before, a weapon designed specifically to counter his unique abilities. Inquisitor Vex stepped back, her hand moving to the elaborate pistol at her side. Whatever they're planning, we cannot allow it to succeed. The knowledge they might gain from studying your capabilities could be catastrophic if it spreads to other hive fleets. Robert nodded, understanding her concern. The Tyranids learned from every encounter, incorporating new biological adaptations with each generation. If they managed to develop countermeasures against his abilities, those adaptations would be shared across their entire species through the hive mind's genetic memory. Then I need to stop them before they can complete whatever they're building, Robert said, golden energy beginning to coalesce around his form once again. But I want you to understand something first. I'm not your enemy, and I'm not going anywhere. This reality needs protection, and I intend to provide it whether your Inquisition approves or not. Vex's augmetic eyes narrowed. That decision is not yours to make, Anomaly. The Imperium has survived for 10,000 years precisely because we do not allow unknown variables to operate without oversight. Before Robert could respond, the transformed bioship completed its metamorphosis. The new structures across its hull began to glow with an sickly light that made reality itself seem to bend and waver. This wasn't just biological adaptation anymore. The Tyranids had incorporated something far more dangerous into their assault, drawing upon forces that existed outside normal space-time. The weapon fired, and the beam that lanced downward wasn't composed of matter or energy in any conventional sense. It was pure negation, a force designed to unravel the fundamental bonds that held reality together at the quantum level. It struck Robert's golden aura, and, for the first time since his arrival in this universe, his defenses were tested. The impact sent shockwaves rippling outward, shattering windows for blocks in every direction and sending the watching soldiers stumbling. But Robert remained standing, his aura flickering but holding firm against the alien assault. The weapon continued firing, pouring more and more negation energy into its attack, but Robert's power seemed to adapt and strengthen in response to the challenge. Impossible, Vex breathed, her augmetic eyes recording readings that defied every law of physics she understood. No mortal being should be able to withstand a reality disruptor field. That weapon was designed to counter the most powerful psychers in the galaxy. Robert looked up at the bioship, his expression hardening with resolve. The Tyranids had just escalated this conflict beyond anything he had been prepared for. They weren't just threatening the people of this world anymore. They were wielding forces that could potentially damage the fabric of reality itself. "That's enough," he said quietly, but his words carried across the battlefield with the resonance of thunder. The golden aura around him intensified until it became difficult to look at directly, and when he spoke again, his voice held harmonics that seemed to emanate from multiple dimensions simultaneously. "I came here by accident, and I've tried to be reasonable about the situation, but if you want to threaten reality itself, then we're going to have a problem." The Sentry rose into the air, no longer the careful, controlled figure who had been trying to avoid causing alarm among the human forces. This was the being who had once held his own against cosmic entities, who had stood as Earth's greatest protector against threats from beyond the stars. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, like watching a sleeping giant finally decide to wake up. High above, the bioship's weapon systems began to overload as they tried to maintain their assault against an opponent who was no longer simply enduring their attack but actively resisting it. The negation beam wavered and began to bend back upon itself, the alien technology unable to process the paradox of a target that grew stronger under bombardment. Inquisitor Vex watched this display with growing alarm and fascination. In her years of service to the Imperium, she had witnessed the power of Primarchs and greater daemons, had seen reality bend before the will of entities that existed beyond mortal comprehension. But this was something new, something that didn't fit into any of the categories her training had prepared her for. "What are you?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to Robert or simply voicing the question that had begun to consume her thoughts. The answer, when it came, would change everything she thought she knew about the nature of power and the possibilities that existed within the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. The bioship's hull began to buckle under the strain of its own weapon systems. Organic conduits burst along its flanks, spraying bioluminescent fluids into the crimson sky. The reality disruptor had been designed as the ultimate weapon against entities that defied conventional understanding, but it had never been tested against something that existed so far outside the Tyranids' accumulated knowledge base. Robert ascended toward the massive organism, his golden aura leaving trails of light in the polluted atmosphere. Each meter of altitude brought new revelations about the alien craft's construction. It wasn't just grown, he realized, but cultivated across centuries of warfare. Every surface told the story of battles fought and species consumed, their genetic material incorporated into the vessel's living architecture. The hive mind recoiled as he approached, its collective consciousness experiencing something akin to confusion for the first time in eons. This entity registered on their biological sensors as a single organism, yet the energy output suggested something far larger. The psychic emanations were unlike anything in their genetic memory, carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with fundamental forces the Tyranids had never encountered. Deep within the bioship's neural clusters, synaptic creatures writhed in distress as contradictory data flooded their processing centers. Their analysis algorithms had been refined across millions of worlds, capable of categorizing and adapting to any threat the galaxy might produce. But this golden figure approaching their vessel simply didn't compute according to any parameters they understood. Robert reached the bioship's hull and placed his palm against its surface. The living metal was warm beneath his touch, pulsing with rhythms that spoke of a circulatory system spanning kilometers. For a moment, he felt a strange kinship with the creature. It was alien beyond human comprehension, but it was still alive, still following the imperatives that drove its existence. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his words somehow carrying through the vacuum to reach the consciousness within. "But I can't let you hurt these people." The bioship's response was immediate and desperate. Every weapon system that could be brought to bear swiveled toward the figure on its hull, biological cannons that could punch through the armor of Imperial battleships, unleashing their fury at point-blank range. Corrosive acids that could dissolve adamantium splashed across Robert's form, followed by living projectiles designed to burrow into their target and consume it from within. None of it had any effect. The Sentry stood unmoved amid the biological maelstrom, his golden aura protecting him from forces that could have sterilized continents. But more than that, he was analyzing the creature's structure, understanding the delicate balance of systems that kept it functional. His enhanced perception could trace the flow of nutrients through its body, map the neural pathways that connected it to the hive mind, identify the critical junctions where a precise application of force might achieve maximum effect. Below on the surface, Inquisitor Vex watched through her augmetic eyes as the drama unfolded above. Her instruments were recording energy signatures that defied every law of physics she understood, readings that suggested the golden figure was somehow existing partially outside normal space-time. The implications were staggering and terrifying in equal measure. "Sergeant Valdris," she commanded without taking her gaze from the aerial battle, "evacuate all personnel from a 5-kilometer radius. If that entity loses control of his power, the collateral damage could be catastrophic." Valdris nodded grimly, already coordinating the withdrawal through his Vox unit. His men had seen enough impossible things today to trust the Inquisitor's judgment without question. But as they began their tactical retreat, many couldn't help but steal glances upward at the figure who had appeared from nowhere to stand against a threat that could have consumed their world. The bioship was dying, its biological systems failing, as the Sentry's presence disrupted the delicate equilibrium that kept it functional. But in its death throes, the massive organism made one final desperate gambit. Deep within its core, organs that had never been used before began to activate, drawing upon reserves of energy that the hive mind had been saving for truly dire circumstances. The space around the bioship began to warp and twist as the creature attempted something that went against every instinct of its species. Instead of trying to consume or adapt to the threat, it was preparing to sacrifice itself in an attempt to deny the enemy any victory. The organic hull began to collapse inward, building toward a biological implosion that would release forces capable of cracking the planet's crust. Robert sensed the change immediately. The alien consciousness had shifted from predatory hunger to something resembling desperation, accepting its own destruction if it could take him with it. The gathering energies were immense, drawing upon the stored biomass of countless consumed worlds to fuel a reaction that would make a nuclear explosion seem gentle by comparison. "Clever," Robert murmured, genuine admiration in his voice. The Tyranids were learning even in defeat, demonstrating a tactical flexibility that spoke to the terrifying intelligence guiding their actions. But their solution created a new problem. If the bioship detonated while still in atmosphere, the resulting explosion would sterilize everything within hundreds of kilometers. The Sentry made his choice in the span of a heartbeat. Instead of fleeing or attempting to contain the explosion, he wrapped his arms around the bioship's hull and began to accelerate upward. The massive organism, kilometers in length and massing more than most Imperial battleships, lifted from the planet's surface as if it weighed nothing at all. The strain was enormous, not because of the physical mass, but because he was fighting against the bioship's own death throes. The creature's biological systems were trying to anchor it to the planet below, organic grapples extending like desperate tentacles toward the surface. Robert tore through them without slowing, his golden aura carving through living metal as he carried his burden toward the void. Behind him, the remaining bioships began to withdraw, their organic hulls rippling with the colors of confusion and fear. The hive mind was reassessing its entire approach to this world, calculating whether the potential gains were worth the losses they were sustaining. For a species accustomed to inevitable victory through sheer numbers and adaptive evolution, this tactical retreat was almost unprecedented. Robert cleared the atmosphere just as the bioship's core reached critical mass. The explosion that followed was visible from the planet's surface, a new star being born and dying in the space of seconds. The shockwave rippled outward through the void, carrying with it the scattered atoms of a creature that had once been capable of consuming worlds. But the Sentry was already falling back toward the surface, his cape streaming behind him like a banner of hope in the darkness. The golden light that surrounded him seemed brighter now, as if the act of protecting innocent lives had somehow strengthened his connection to the fundamental forces that powered his abilities. He landed in the same spot where he had first appeared, his feet touching ferrocrete with barely a whisper of displaced air. Around him, the scattered remnants of the Tyranid ground forces lay silent and still, their connection to the hive mind severed by the destruction of their synapse creatures. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but Robert could sense other dangers stirring in response to his actions. Inquisitor Vex approached cautiously, her retinue maintaining a respectful distance. The readings her instruments had recorded during the battle defied rational explanation, suggesting power levels that rivaled those attributed to the legendary Primarchs of old. But more than that, there had been something in the entity's behavior that challenged her fundamental assumptions about the nature of power and corruption. "You destroyed an entire bioship," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and suspicion. "The energy expenditure alone should have been beyond any mortal being's capabilities, yet you show no signs of exhaustion or strain." Robert brushed dust from his cape, a gesture so mundane it seemed almost absurd given what they had just witnessed. "Where I come from, protecting people is what heroes do. The power isn't what makes someone a hero. It's the choice to use that power responsibly." Heroes. Vex repeated the word as if it were foreign to her tongue. "In the Imperium, we have saints and champions, martyrs and crusaders. But heroes? That concept died with the Great Crusade, when we learned that even the most noble intentions can be corrupted by the ruinous powers. Then, maybe it's time to remember what the word means." Robert replied gently, "I've seen what happens when people lose hope, when they convince themselves that cruelty is necessary for survival. It doesn't lead anywhere good." Before Vex could respond, new contacts appeared on the horizon. These weren't the organic curves of Tyranid bioships, but the angular geometries of Imperial vessels. A full battle group was approaching, their auger arrays no doubt having detected the massive energy discharge from the bioship's destruction. At their head flew a ship whose configuration suggested it belonged to one of the Adeptus Astartes chapters. "Space Marines," Valdris observed, consulting his tactical display. "The Storm Wardens, by their heraldry. They must have been en route when the Tyranid incursion began." Robert watched the approaching vessels with interest. He could sense the beings aboard them, humans who had been transformed into something more than mortal through a combination of genetic engineering and surgical enhancement. Their psychic signatures burned with purpose and dedication, but there was something else there too, a darkness that spoke of secrets and knowledge too terrible for ordinary minds to bear. The lead vessel began its descent, massive retro thrusters scarring the landscape as it settled onto the ferrocrete with thunderous impacts. The boarding ramp descended with mechanical precision, and from within emerged figures that seemed to step out of legend itself. They were giants in power armor that gleamed like polished silver, their faces hidden behind helmets adorned with storm imagery. At their head walked a figure whose presence dominated the battlefield, despite being no taller than his brothers. His armor was more elaborate than the others, marked with honors and battle scars that spoke of centuries of warfare. When he removed his helmet, the face revealed was aquiline and noble, but marked by eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy's horrors. "I am Captain Mordian Kestrel, of the Storm Warden's Third Company," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the ruins. "We detected massive Xenos bioship signatures in this system and came to investigate what transpired here." Inquisitor Vex stepped forward, her authority as an agent of the Inquisition taking precedence even over the legendary Space Marines. "Captain Kestrel, we have encountered an anomalous entity of unprecedented power. It claims to have single-handedly destroyed a Tyranid bioship, and our instrument readings support this assertion." Kestrel's gaze shifted to Robert, and the Sentry felt the weight of enhanced senses examining him from multiple angles. The Space Marine's augmented vision could perceive across spectrums invisible to normal humans, while his genetic modifications allowed him to process information at superhuman speeds. What he saw clearly disturbed him. "You register on none of our threat assessment parameters," Kestrel said slowly. "Your power signature is unlike anything in our databases, yet you show no signs of chaos, corruption, or xenotech enhancement. This should not be possible." "I keep hearing that," Robert replied with a slight smile. "Your universe seems to have very rigid rules about what's possible and what isn't. Where I come from, we learn to be more flexible about such things." The captain's expression hardened. Flexibility in the face of the unknown has led to the damnation of entire systems, anomaly. The Imperium survives because we understand the nature of the threats we face and respond accordingly. "And what about new threats?" Robert asked. "Ones that don't fit into your existing categories?" "The Tyranids you just faced were adapting to everything you threw at them. They were learning, evolving. How do you fight an enemy like that with rigid thinking?" Kestrel was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that clearly troubled him. The Storm Wardens were known for their pragmatic approach to warfare, but even they operated within strict doctrinal boundaries. The idea of embracing true flexibility, of abandoning the certainties that had guided humanity for millennia, was almost heretical. "You speak of adaptation as if it were a virtue," he said finally, "but we have seen where such thinking leads. The traitor legions thought themselves above the constraints of doctrine and duty. They believed they could master forces beyond their comprehension. Their arrogance doomed them to eternal servitude to powers that exist beyond mortal understanding." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "I've encountered similar entities in my own reality. The temptation to use their power for good causes is always there, but the cost is always higher than you expect. The key is knowing the difference between adaptation and corruption." "And you claim to know this difference?" "I've had to learn it the hard way. I've made mistakes, trusted the wrong entities, caused harm when I meant to help, but that doesn't mean I stopped trying to do better." Captain Kestrel exchanged glances with Inquisitor Vex, both clearly grappling with concepts that challenged their fundamental worldview. In the Imperium of man, moral complexity was a luxury that few could afford. The threats facing humanity were so immense and varied that absolute certainty had become a survival mechanism. Doubt led to hesitation, and hesitation led to death on a galactic scale. But here stood an entity that embodied everything their doctrine warned against, yet had acted in humanity's defense without any apparent ulterior motive. The contradiction was unsettling in ways that went beyond simple tactical concerns. "Your presence here cannot be coincidental," Vex said finally. "In our experience, beings of your power level do not simply appear without purpose. What do you want from this galaxy?" Robert considered the question carefully. It was one he had been asking himself since arriving in this grim reality, and he wasn't sure he had a complete answer. "I want to help," he said simply. "I want to find a way home, but while I'm here, I can't stand by and watch people suffer when I have the power to intervene." "Help." Kestrel repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept. "And when your help is no longer needed? When you grow bored with playing protector to a species that is not your own? What then?" "Then I hope I'll have the wisdom to step back and let you handle things yourselves," Robert replied. "But right now, you're facing threats that are beyond what any single world or system can handle alone. The Tyranids I just fought were a scouting force. The real Hive fleet is still out there, learning from what happened here." The implications of his words sent a chill through both the Inquisitor and the Space Marine captain. If this had been merely a probing attack, then the main Tyranid force would return with adaptations specifically designed to counter the tactics they had observed. The bioships would be rebuilt with new weapon systems. The ground forces would be enhanced with genetic modifications to resist whatever had destroyed their predecessors. "You have doomed this world," Vex said quietly, her augmetic eyes focusing on Robert with cold calculation. "Your intervention may have saved lives in the short term, but you have provided the Hive mind with data that will make their eventual victory inevitable." Robert felt a chill of his own as he realized the truth in her words. In his own universe, decisive victories were celebrated because they ended threats permanently. But in this reality, even victory carried the seeds of future defeat. The Tyranids would learn from their losses, adapt their tactics, return stronger than before. His intervention had bought time, nothing more. "Then we use that time wisely," he said, his voice carrying new resolve. "We prepare for their return. We adapt too." "Adaptation requires knowledge," Captain Kestrel observed. "Knowledge of your capabilities, your origins, your true nature. If you genuinely wish to aid humanity's cause, you will submit to examination by our most skilled interrogators and tech priests." The request was reasonable from their perspective, but Robert could sense the undercurrents of suspicion and fear that motivated it. These people had learned to view power with distrust, to assume that any being capable of great good was equally capable of great evil. Their caution was born from bitter experience with entities that had promised salvation and delivered damnation instead. "I understand your concerns," Robert said carefully, "but I won't be imprisoned or experimented upon. I've been down that road before, and it never ends well for anyone involved. I'm willing to work with you, to share what I know, but it has to be as an equal partner, not a specimen." The standoff stretched between them, two worldviews in conflict. The representatives of the Imperium saw only the potential for catastrophe in allowing such power to operate without oversight. Robert saw only the necessity of maintaining his freedom to act according to his conscience. Neither side was entirely wrong, but neither was entirely right either. It was Sergeant Valdris who broke the silence, his scarred face showing the weight of everything he had witnessed. "With respect to both parties," he said carefully, "perhaps this discussion would be better held somewhere more secure. We are still in an active combat zone, and there may be surviving tyrannid organisms in the area." His words served as a reminder that their philosophical disagreements were taking place against a backdrop of very real and immediate dangers. Whatever they decided about Robert's status, it would have to account for the practical realities of warfare in the 41st millennium. Robert nodded, accepting the wisdom of the veteran soldier's suggestion. "Where would you like to continue this conversation?" Captain Kestrel considered for a moment before responding. "The Storm Wardens maintain a fortress monastery on the edge of this system. It is heavily defended and equipped with examination facilities that could provide answers to some of our questions about your nature. And if those answers aren't what you're hoping for, then we will deal with that situation as it develops. The Emperor protects, but vigilance is the price of that protection." As they prepared to depart the battlefield, Robert took one last look at the scattered remains of the Tyrannid force. In his own universe, this would have been the end of the story. The heroes would have won, the threat would have been eliminated, and life would have returned to normal. But here, in the grim darkness of the far future, every victory was temporary, every peace was merely a pause between wars. He was beginning to understand why the people of this reality seemed so haunted, so willing to embrace harsh measures in the name of survival. They lived in a universe where hope was a luxury few could afford, where kindness was often seen as weakness, and where the price of freedom was eternal vigilance against forces that sought to corrupt or destroy everything they held dear. But understanding their perspective didn't mean he had to accept it entirely. Perhaps what this reality needed wasn't another warrior or another weapon, but someone who remembered what it meant to hope for something better. Someone who could show them that strength and compassion weren't mutually exclusive, that it was possible to fight monsters without becoming one yourself. The question was whether he could maintain that perspective in a universe that seemed designed to crush such optimism. As they prepared to board the Space Marine vessel, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that his greatest battles lay not ahead, but within himself, as he struggled to remain the hero he had always been, in a reality that had forgotten what heroes were supposed to represent. The Storm Warden's vessel rose from the scarred landscape with the ponderous grace of a cathedral taking flight. Inside its adamantium hull, Robert found himself walking corridors that seemed designed to humble rather than comfort. Every surface bore inscriptions in Gothic script, prayers, and litanies that spoke of duty, sacrifice, and the eternal vigil against darkness. The scale was overwhelming, built for giants who had transcended mortal limitations, yet remained bound by codes of honor that predated their transformation. Captain Kestrel led the way through passages lined with weapon racks and devotional alcoves. His power armor moved with mechanical precision, servo motors whirring softly as they compensated for the massive weight of ceramite plates. Behind them followed Inquisitor Vex, her retinue maintaining formation despite the cramped confines of the ship. The tension was palpable, unspoken questions hanging in the recycled air like incense smoke. "Your vessel is impressive," Robert offered, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, though I have to admit the aesthetic is rather grim. Kestrel's helmet turned slightly, the red glow of his optics reflecting off polished metal surfaces. Beauty is a luxury we cannot afford when function determines survival. Every system aboard this vessel has been tested in the crucible of war. Aesthetics serve only to remind us of our purpose. They passed through a massive archway adorned with carved skulls and storm imagery. Beyond lay the ship's chapel, a cavernous space dominated by stained glass windows that depicted scenes of battle and martyrdom. Rows of pews stretched toward an altar where power weapons hung like religious artifacts, their surfaces gleaming with consecrated oils. "This is where we honor our fallen," Kestrel explained, his voice carrying unexpected reverence. "Every brother who has given his life in service to the Emperor is remembered here. Their sacrifice ensures that humanity endures another day against the darkness." Robert studied the memorial plaques that lined the walls, each one bearing names and dates that represented lives cut short in humanity's defense. The sheer number was staggering, speaking to centuries of constant warfare against enemies he was only beginning to understand. Yet there was something else here too, a sense of purpose that transcended mere duty. These warriors genuinely believed in what they were fighting for, even if their methods seemed harsh by his standards. "How many worlds have you protected?" Robert asked quietly. 73 successful campaigns over the past 2 centuries, Kestrel replied without hesitation. 17 worlds saved from corruption, 26 from xenoform infestation, 30 from heretical uprising. Each victory purchased with blood, each defeat remembered as a lesson for future battles. The numbers were delivered with clinical precision, but Robert could sense the weight they carried. Behind each statistic lay countless individual stories of heroism and sacrifice, moments where ordinary humans had chosen to stand against impossible odds simply because it was right. The realization struck him that these people weren't so different from the heroes he had known in his own reality. They simply operated in a context where the stakes were infinitely higher and the margin for error non-existent. They continued through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, past armoriums where weapons of incredible sophistication lay ready for deployment. Robert caught glimpses of devices that seemed to blend technology with artistry. Bolt rifles whose mechanisms were works of engineering, poetry, power swords whose edges hummed with barely contained energy. Everything spoke to a civilization that had elevated warfare to the level of sacred art. "Your weaponry is remarkable," Robert observed, pausing before a display case containing what appeared to be a miniaturized cannon. "The fusion of form and function is unlike anything I've encountered." Inquisitor Vex moved up beside him, her augmetic eyes focusing on the weapon with proprietary interest. "That is a storm bolter, blessed by the Adeptus Mechanicus and sanctified in the blood of martyrs. It has served in 17 major campaigns, each blessing adding to its spiritual potency as well as its physical effectiveness." Spiritual potency? "In this universe, belief has power," Vex explained, her voice taking on a lecturer's cadence. "Faith can turn aside daemon blades, prayer can strengthen armor against impossible odds, and blessed weapons strike with force beyond their physical parameters. The Emperor's light flows through all things touched by genuine devotion." Robert nodded thoughtfully, filing away this information for later consideration. His own powers had always operated on principles he didn't fully understand, drawing from sources that existed beyond conventional physics. Perhaps in this reality, the line between science and faith was more blurred than he had initially assumed. They emerged onto what Kestrel identified as the observation deck, a vast chamber whose forward wall was composed entirely of armored glass. Through it, the void of space stretched endlessly, punctuated by distant stars that seemed cold and hostile compared to the warm suns of Robert's home universe. But it was what lay ahead that drew his attention, a structure so massive it defied immediate comprehension. The Storm Warden's fortress monastery hung in the darkness like a metallic moon, its surface bristling with defensive installations and sensor arrays. Gothic spires reached outward from its central mass, each one capable of housing thousands of warriors. Weapon batteries tracked their approach with mechanical precision, while patrol craft moved in careful patterns around the perimeter. The Stormhold, Kestrel announced with obvious pride, built into an asteroid that was hollowed out over 3 millennia ago. It has never fallen to enemy assault, though it has been besieged on 17 separate occasions. Robert studied the fortress with professional interest, his enhanced vision picking out details that would have been invisible to normal human sight. The defensive systems were layered and redundant, designed by minds that understood the nature of the threats they faced. But more than that, he could sense the spiritual weight of the place, the accumulated faith and determination of generations of warriors who had called it home. "It's magnificent," he said honestly, "a testament to human ingenuity and determination." "And human sacrifice," Vex added quietly. "Every stone was laid by brothers who knew they might not live to see its completion. Every weapon emplacement was calibrated with the blood of those who died testing its effectiveness. This fortress represents everything our species has learned about survival in a hostile galaxy." As they drew closer, Robert began to appreciate the true scale of the installation. What he had initially taken for defensive turrets were revealed to be massive weapon systems capable of engaging capital ships. The patrol craft he had observed were actually the size of Imperial cruisers, their hulls scarred by battles fought in the void between stars. The monastery wasn't just a fortress, it was a small city dedicated entirely to the art of war. Their vessel approached one of the many docking bays that dotted the asteroid's surface, guided by traffic controllers whose voices carried the crisp efficiency of military professionals. As they settled into the assigned berth, Robert could feel the weight of countless eyes upon him, warriors and servitors alike, drawn by reports of the anomalous entity who had single-handedly destroyed a Tyranid bioship. The docking bay itself was a marvel of engineering, large enough to accommodate vessels many times the size of their transport. Overhead, massive cranes moved with mechanical precision, unloading supplies and equipment, while teams of tech priests supervised the maintenance of various craft. The air hummed with activity, yet everything orchestrated patterns moved according to carefully that spoke to centuries of refined procedure. "Welcome to the Stormhold," Kestrel said as the boarding ramp descended. "Few outsiders have ever set foot within these halls. Consider it an honor, regardless of what our investigations may reveal about your nature." Robert stepped onto the deck plating, immediately noting the artificial gravity's perfect calibration and the subtle recycling systems that maintained atmospheric quality. Everything about this place spoke to a mastery of technology that his own era would have considered miraculous, yet it was all dedicated to the singular purpose of making war more effective. A delegation was waiting for them in the bay, figures whose very presence seemed to command respect. At their head stood an individual whose power armor was even more elaborate than Captain Kestrel's, marked with honors and battle scars that told the story of a lifetime spent in humanity's service. His face, when revealed, showed the weathered features of a man who had seen too much, but retained the strength to continue bearing witness. "Chapter Master Thane," Kestrel said formally, removing his own helmet in a gesture of respect. "I present the anomalous entity encountered during the Tyranid incursion. As requested, we have brought him for examination and evaluation." Thane studied Robert with eyes that seemed to look through flesh and bone to examine the soul beneath. His gaze was penetrating but not unkind, the assessment of a leader who had learned to judge character quickly and accurately. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute command tempered by genuine wisdom. "So you are the one who destroyed a hive ship with his bare hands," Thane said, his tone carefully neutral. "The reports strain credulity, yet the evidence is undeniable. Tell me, stranger, what drives a being of your apparent power to involve himself in our struggles?" "The same thing that drives your warriors, I imagine," Robert replied. "The belief that some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the personal cost." "And what do you believe is worth such sacrifice?" "Life, hope, the chance for people to build something better than what came before." Thane was quiet for a long moment, processing words that clearly resonated despite their apparent simplicity. Around them, the activity of the docking bay continued, but Robert could sense the attention focused on their conversation. Every warrior present understood that they were witnessing something significant, though none could predict what consequences might follow. And so the Sentry stands at the crossroads of two realities, his golden light casting new shadows across the grim darkness of the far future. In a universe where hope is heresy and compassion is weakness, Robert Reynolds carries the burden of remembering what heroes were meant to represent. The Imperium has survived 10,000 years through sacrifice and vigilance, but perhaps what it truly needs is someone who still believes in the possibility of perfect victories. Whether the Golden Guardian becomes humanity's greatest champion or its most dangerous threat remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: the 41st millennium will never be the same.